Welcome to LiteraryAF podcast.
My name is Sheldon.
I'm Danny.
And we are just a couple people who
like books.
Yeah.
A lot.
So this podcast, by books, for books.
I'm not actually a book.
Yeah. And actually we want people to listen, not books.
Yeah.
So
book enthusiasts.
Why are we starting this podcast?
Why are we starting this podcast?
Yeah.
Because we like to talk about books, and I find that a lot of my friends don't actually read. So
True, yeah. I just like the sound of my own voice, so if I can just force that onto other people, I'll be happy.
See, I'm the opposite. I hate the sound of my voice because I sound like a little boy.
Well, get used to
I
it.
know. This is like a loving myself exercise.
Oh, self-care.
Yes.
All right. Well, we thought for our first episode, it'd be pretty cool. Pretty chill, actually. If we did like the desert island, if you're stuck on a desert island for the rest of your life and you can only bring 5 books with you, which books would you bring and why? So just so you can get to know our reading taste a little bit better, and kind of serves as like like basics, like if you want to know me, read these 5 books kind of thing.
We have very different tastes in books, I've learned.
That's true. Well, we have one like very similar.
Yeah.
We have one thing that ties us together.
Yeah, but aside from that, I feel like we have a very wide interest in books between the two of us, and that's nice. We're not constantly talking about the same stuff all the time.
Very true. Okay, so what's your first book?
My first book is actually Persuasion by Jane Austen.
Oh, Jane Austen. I've heard of her.
It's my favorite Austen romance, for sure.
Ooh, better than Pride and Prejudice.
Yeah, I think just barely. Like, the movie adaptations of Pride and Prejudice, those are the best, but the book itself, I like Persuasion the most. For anybody who doesn't know, Persuasion is about Anne Elliot and Frederick Wentworth. Anne is, she's in a relationship-ish with Wentworth, as much as you could be in the Regency era, but her good friend convinces her that it's not really worth anything, and she breaks it off. And the book takes place 8 years later, when they kind of come back into close circles with each other. And it's about she still loves him, and does he still love her, and a lot of back and forth like that. Anne's also Austen's oldest protagonist, and I always kind of like that. It's a very satisfying read for me.
Well, you're not into the like 15-year-old romances?
No, not so much. I'm at the point in my life where I don't relate with Mary Ann as much anymore.
All right. Well, my first one is actually Les Miserables by Victor Hugo.
Right.
If you've seen the musical, you have a rough idea what the plot is.
Like hundreds of times, for sure. Yeah.
And there's like the Liam Neeson version, which I've never actually sat through.
I haven't seen it because they don't sing.
I know. I bought it thinking it was the musical, and I watched it for like half an hour, and then I turned it off, never to be viewed again.
Yeah.
But it's very enjoyable. It's super long, so I actually got the abridged version, which is still 1,200 pages.
Oh,
but
that's so many.
At least it like cuts down on certain chapters that aren't very necessary. So like in the real book, there are like entire sections of the book dedicated to what the Paris sewer systems are like, or like, do you remember like Fantine and Cosette and stuff? Well, they have this whole side story of like Fantine's romance and like how she got pregnant with Cosette.
Right.
And he cuts it down, like the abridged version cuts it down to about a chapter and a half, whereas the original I think is around like 3 chapters of kind of like this thing that happens that doesn't really matter too much.
Yeah.
So
that's why I never really read that book. It just seems so long.
But it's extremely worth it. Like, they have like, because it's like 5 kind of stories almost that build up to each point. Like there's the Jean Valjean escaping and like meeting the priest and all that, and then there's the town with Fantine, and Jean Valjean's the mayor, and Javert's like sniffing around. That's like it's the next part of the story. And then there's the and that part also has the Cosette and the innkeepers, the Thénardiers.
Yeah.
And then the next part I think is the it's the no, it's not the merriest part. It's the what's her name? Eponine.
Eponine, yeah.
It's there's a whole part that's not in the musical where Jean Valjean is living in this like kind of crappy apartment building with Cosette, and the Thénardiers also live in that same apartment building. It's like a slum. Right. And then Cosette's older at this point, but they're like figuring out like, oh, we think this is the guy and the kid. And I might be totally wrong. I might be misremembering this hard. Because now that I'm saying it out loud, I feel like it's actually Marius that lives in the apartment building and not Jean Valjean. But either way, it's like there's like 5 stories, and they're like, or like there's 5 sections of the book, and each part's like their own story, and just like the build up to the end is so good. It's fantastic. Yeah. Okay, what's your second book?
My second book. This was a tough one. I was torn between Pet Sematary and It by Stephen King. It's really hard choice because I love both of those books a lot. Pet Sematary was one of the first Stephen King books that I actually read. It's also like a good movie. I love that movie, which is also getting a remake this year, I believe.
Ooh.
But it is like such a long book that it would keep me occupied if I was stuck on a deserted island.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
It's a matter of time. It would probably be the better way to go.
Pet Sematary is a really good book.
It is. It's kind of weird at the end, but you can say that about most of the Stephen King books out there.
I always say it's my favorite Stephen King, but it's the only Stephen King I've read.
Bag of Bones was the very first Stephen King book that I read, and it was really good.
Okay.
But it's not so much a horror. Also gets kind of weird at the end.
Fun.
Yeah.
I think my second one, okay, we already talked about Jane Austen.
Yeah.
Mine would be Pride and Prej.
Yeah.
I feel like I don't have to go through the plot. I feel like people know it.
It's a pretty standard plot.
If you don't know it, you should just read it because it's delightful.
Yeah. Or spark notes of it even. You can get so many of those.
No, you got to read it.
It's if you can't
over
get
the language. It's like 200 pages.
It's true. But if the language could be very difficult for some people.
Well, okay. Well, let me explain my journey with that book.
Okay.
When I first started, I didn't like it because I felt like, why are they taking this so seriously? Like, why are they talking like, or like, the language is like takes a little bit to get into, but it's also just like, why do they care about this stuff? Why is the mom so like overbearing? Why are they like so insufferable? And then it like kind of like snapped in my head that it's like, oh, this is a comedy. Like the mom is supposed to be overbearing. Yeah. And then Mr. Collins shows up and I'm like, oh, this is like funny. And then the big thing happens with Darcy and you're like, oh, this is intriguing. And then thing happens with Darcy's manor or whatever, Pemberley.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, okay, this book is amazing and I love it more than life itself.
Yeah.
And I would recommend it 100%. And if you have to power through the language a little bit, like, it's worth it.
Yeah. It's I love Pride and Prejudice. Don't get me wrong. It's just Persuasion is just like that much more dear to me.
I liked Persuasion, but I didn't like. It didn't have like the twist that I really like in Jane Austen books. Like Sense and Sensibility has that good twist in the middle, and Pride and Prejudice has that really good twist with Darcy not being bad.
Yeah.
And like revealing that Elizabeth was actually the one that was kind of like
she was the proud one, not Darcy. Yeah.
It's like that was such a fun moment, and I was just waiting for that to happen in Persuasion. It never did.
For Persuasion, it's more like the love is more fulfilling to me, I guess. Okay. Wentworth's letter at the end is very touching, and I was.
How does that one end? I don't even remember.
He writes her like a love note, basically, where it's like, I still love you after all these years. It's if you still feel the same way as I do, let me know, stuff like this, and it's just really sweet. I really liked it.
Ooh, fun. Mm-hmm. All right, what's your third? My
third book is Memoirs of a Geisha by Arthur Golden.
Oh.
That's one of my favorite movies as well as one of my favorite books. The book centers around a girl named Chio, later Sayuri, I believe.
That's right, yeah.
Who is sold into a geisha house when her parents get sick and eventually die. And it follows her journey training to be a geisha in a time where geishas are starting to fall out of fashion right at, I believe, World War II. Right at the start of World War II.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact time, but it was,
It was around there. And it follows her training and growing up to be this beautiful young woman and her pursuit of a man called the Chairman. And it's also a love story that I like a lot.
I like that book too. I like the setting so much. Yeah. Like it's just like that old-fashioned Japan is such like a fun like time period.
That's why I read it originally. I was like, I love this time period. I'm going to read this book. And then I read the book and I just fell in love with all of it.
My big thing was I felt like it was going for the Beauty and the Beast thing with the Nobu, and I thought the chairman was like somebody she'd kind of get over because he was ignoring her for so long.
Yeah.
And then she just dissed my boy Nobu at the end.
I understand that, and I would have been fine with both endings.
Yeah.
But I do love the chairman.
Yeah.
So, what's your
number three? Number three is The Idiot by Dostoevsky.
Okay.
It's the first Russian classic I ever read. Like, and okay, so a lot of people, it's a book that's hard to recommend to people because the Russian classics are like rough. They're like, every character has like 5 names, and it'll be like Vladimir Denitskin, but then also they'll call him like Nedry, and you'll be like, why? And then also he'll just be like Vlad, and you're like, who? Like, so they'll have like 5 different names they'll refer to each character, and you'll be like, why? I thought this guy, are they talking about the prince right now, or are they talking about whatever his real name is? Or are they talking about, and it's like, so you have to like parse through a lot of names, and it takes a long time to like catch on to what's going on and who's who.
Yeah.
But The Idiot is just such a like pure story. Like it's like old school Russia when they had like the czars and the like the pre-Rasputin Russia, I guess. And this guy who's like he's a prince of like, I mean, he's like a lesser prince, so he's like not super well known, but like known enough that people are like, oh, it's a big deal. And he's gone to Switzerland for education. I think it's Switzerland. And when he comes back to Russia as like a young man, he's like kind of like new on the scene, and everyone's like excited by this new prince.
Yeah.
But they find out like he doesn't have the same social skills as everyone, and he's very like trusting and naive, and they like kind of view him as like this weird oddity, and they think he's an idiot because he doesn't get their like social games, but he's like super pure of heart and just like he's a really like nice and sweet character.
Cinnamon roll.
Yeah, he is. He's the cinnamon roll. The ultimate cinnamon roll.
Yeah.
And then you have like these characters who are like trying to like play him and like manipulate him, but then like they have like transformations because they realize what they're doing is horrible. And like it's been a long time since I've read it, so I'm probably not doing a super accurate like coverage of the story, but it had like such an effect on me when I was younger, like when I first read it. And whenever I like have to think of my favorite books, it's always like one of the first ones in my head. And if it weren't like so long and difficult, I would probably like be rereading it regularly. But as it is, it's still a good book. What's your number 4?
My number 4 is Emperor Mage by Tamora Pierce.
Ooh.
So this is the 3rd book in a series about a girl named Dane, who has magical powers, and the series follows her as she kind of discovers these powers and learns how to use them. And I read these when I was in high school, and it's a series about a girl who talks to animals and she turns into animals. And when I was a high schooler, this book spoke to me on a personal level.
I always laugh at the power to like speak to animals because I'm like, technically we all have that power.
Yes.
They
she
just
can
can't
understand them
this.
when they reply back to her. Yes. I like the whole series. It's like one of my favorites. But there's this one in particular I picked out of the 4 books. This is the 3rd book. Because there's a scene where she loses her temper. She thinks somebody really close to her has died. And her reaction to this is mass resurrecting a museum full of dinosaur skeletons and rampaging through a castle.
Okay, that sounds pretty fun.
It's badass and it's super awesome. And it's great.
Quick question. Okay, this is a peek behind the curtain for anyone listening to this. But this is like the 3rd time we've tried to record this episode, and due to technical difficulties, it hasn't worked before. But is this a different one than what you recommended before?
No, I've recommended this whole series as one of my numbers previously, but I singled out
you
one. You
picked one. Okay, I see.
Because I figured it would probably be best to just select one out of the 4.
That's true. You wouldn't want to cheat on this game that I'm definitely not going to cheat on later.
What's your next book?
My number 4 is To Kill a Mockingbird, and I know that sounds like a real like high school choice.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there are listeners out there who are like, this fool hasn't read books since high school, but I actually never got to read this one during high school.
Oh.
Yeah,
That's pretty standard for high school.
I know, like the way our high school did our English classes, you had to like sign up for what electives you wanted to do, and then they would like assign you to a room or whatever, and then To Kill a Mockingbird was one of the electives, and I just I wanted to take the other ones. I don't know what they were. I think there was like a film one that I took, and there was like, I know I read Old Man and the Sea.
Okay.
And I think I read some Shakespeare one. But yeah, I just missed To Kill a Mockingbird, and I missed Lord of the Flies too.
Oh, that's a good one.
I've read that one since, and yeah it's pretty awesome. But yeah, it's I just like, I really like the perspective of like Scout, like having it be like a young girl telling this like pretty grown up story of like what's going on around her, but she doesn't like really necessarily understand what's happening. Like I think it's a really unique and fun perspective. I like Boo Radley, and when he shows up at the end, I was like cheering.
Yeah.
And just like the character of Atticus, he's like, that's why I read that book was, okay, this is actually embarrassing, but I heard that they based the character of Superman, like, through the comics and stuff, they based him on Atticus Finch, like his personality.
I can totally see that.
And then I was like, oh, well, I have to read this book now, which is a really nerdy reason to read a book, but I'm glad I did, because I really enjoyed it.
It's classic.
What's your last one?
My last book is called Over and Over Again by Cole McCade.
Oh.
It's actually a recent book. It came out in June 2018. So it's a contemporary romance.
Okay.
It's following a 19-year-old named Luca who he acts out at home, and as a result, he's sent over to live on his family friend's farm. And it's a very sweet, like, coming of age story about this kid who's trying to find his place in the world, and it's a romance. It's very slow burn romance, which is a lot of fun.
Oh yeah.
But it's like 700 pages. But it's sweet and definitely worth the time it takes to read.
Wow. My book 5.
Yeah.
I'm cheating. Cheating at our own game.
Yeah.
But I couldn't decide between. There's 2 of them.
Yep.
And I just have to include them both. So if this were actually a desert island, and then some like weird pirate was like, you can only take 5 books with you, yar, I would try to sneak both of these books on as my 5th book. And then you'd
get killed by the pirate.
It'd be worth it. So my 2 picks are On the Road by Jack Kerouac, and then A Farewell to Arms by Hemingway.
Okay.
And On the Road it's like a modern-ish adventure story. Like it's from the 50s, and it's about this guy, he makes this weird friend, and the weird friend is like, yo, man, we're heading out to San Francisco, you dig? That is better 50s talk than I did last time.
The last one, yeah.
Just for a sneak peek to listeners.
Yeah.
I was trying to do 50s voice, and I kept talking like, yo, gangsta, which is not 50s, it turns out. But anyway, yeah, so they go to... So it's like them traveling across the country, and they have these like little adventures, and there's lots of like hitchhiking and working odd jobs, and like getting lost along the way, and like cars breaking down, having to find new cars, or like trying to hitchhike with people and ending up in weird places, and like it's just like, it feels like a modern version of like The Hobbit or something, where it's like, this is a cool like quest, but it's like something I could potentially do in real life.
Yeah.
And then it's like, it almost sets off this like drifter urge where I'm like, I should just hop in my car tomorrow. I could just take off. I could just be in San Francisco by next week.
Yeah.
But it's really good. And yeah, you guys need me to pay rent.
Can't afford this house.
We are roommates, by the way, just so you guys know. The other, Farewell to Arms, is it's also kind of like a love story, but it's like super masculine. It's during World War I, there's a guy who he falls in love with a nurse. He's stationed in Italy, I think, and he's an American who's fighting for the Italians. That's what it is. And he meets this nurse, and they like kind of fall in love, and then he ends up getting injured during the war by a mortar that he never even sees. Like it's just gets blasted, and his leg, I think, gets screwed up. So then he's in the hospital for a while with the nurse alone, and the nurse ends up getting pregnant, and then he ends up deserting the army and then runs off with the nurse. And it's like the second, maybe like the last third of the book is like them trying to escape without getting caught for being deserters, but also like not getting caught up in the war kind of thing.
Right.
And it's very tense. It's very like kind of sweet in like a gruff kind of way. I don't know how to explain it, but Hemingway style is very like short and to the point. Right. And like I found it really tough at first to get used to it, because like he'll do sentences. So instead of being like, hello there, the lieutenant said, it'll just be like, hello there, hi, how are you? Like it'll just be like straight dialogue, and then you got to like kind of get into the rhythm of the conversation without sort it out on your own.
Yeah.
But like once you get into the rhythm of it, you're like, oh, this is actually makes this book a lot easier to read. And
right.
Yeah, I really enjoy it. All right, we are
Nice.
at the 20-minute-ish mark.
Okay, we're getting there.
So we have a couple other just random questions we thought we'd fill out to help you get to know us better as the listeners. I hope you wrote them down because I do not have any of them written down.
Oh, I did. I wrote down. I have one list of a bunch of questions, and then I have like 3 pages of written answers to some of these questions.
You're so prepared.
I was prepared. I was super excited to do this the other day, and I just went nuts.
I have half a page of point form notes that I have reached the bottom of. Okay, what's our first question?
My first question is, if you could insert yourself into any setting or time in a fictional book, what would you pick?
Okay. So I thought about this long and hard. That was slightly sarcastic, but if I could be in the Hunger Games, but not as like one of the poor people.
One of the Capitol guys.
Yeah, one of the people like living in the Capitol who just like wears really weird clothes and watches TV all day.
Yeah.
I think I would go for that. But wait, in the last book, don't they like storm the Capitol or something?
I think it's been such a long time since I've read those books.
I never made it to the 3rd book. I read the first 2. Really? Yeah, I liked the first one a lot, and the second one was kind of disappointing.
I feel like the 3rd book was better than the 2nd book.
Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, so, well, hopefully I don't get stormed, but yeah, that would be my pick, would be a Capitol person, Hunger Games.
Sure.
What's yours?
I was torn. I ended up picking it's paranormal. So there's like werewolves and vampires and Valkyrie and like all kinds of mystical creatures who are living among humans, but the humans are completely unaware of it. So I would pick that kind of setting, but only if I was like part of it.
That's the challenging thing, because it's like, if you're like, oh, I want to be in Harry Potter, and then it's like, well, unless you're Muggle.
Yeah.
Because then it's like basically just normal life, except for there are random magic people who could kill you.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would pick the Immortals After Dark setting as long as I could be involved in the Immortals part.
What's our next question?
Our next question is, if you could resurrect and force an author to resume or force a current writer to write faster, who would you pick?
That's right. Okay. So part of me would love to like resurrect someone like Shakespeare or like, you know, one of the like really classic authors to be like, yo, hit us with something new, give us some fire tracks. But then the more I think about it, I think I would just go to Patrick Rothfuss's house, the guy who wrote Wise Men's Fear and Name of the Wind, and be like, write that 3rd book, you jerk. Those like the 1st book is phenomenal. I love Name of the Wind. 2nd book is mostly good. There's the fairy sex scene, which is way too long and way too like out of the way of the rest of the story.
Yeah.
And like, whenever people criticize him for that, it's like, well, I think that's fair criticism. But just in general, those are really entertaining stories. It's like a really fun character, a really cool world. I love the way they do magic. And he's only written 2 books in that series. I think he wrote like a side story or like an offshoot or something. And I'm like, I don't want that. I want the next story in the sequence. Come on. But yeah, so him.
Okay.
What's your pick?
I would want to say Jane Austen, but I don't know if, because her stuff is such a classic. I don't know if anything else she could write would really fit. Her 6 books that she has are just, they're perfect, and I feel like any more than that could potentially ruin it. But I wish she could see like the kind of reverie, the word I'm looking for, that she has today. With her books are constantly being made into movies and series, and everybody talks about it and they study it in school all the time, because she never got to know about that. Like, her name wasn't put on these books until after she had died.
Yeah, and that's true.
That's really sad that she never got the recognition for this that she really deserved.
Yeah, I've always kind of wondered what her like life was like, that she, I don't know, or like what it could have been instead. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, that'd be interesting to see what she would think of her current legacy.
That doesn't really answer the question, though. That's kind of just what author would I resurrect. But I guess my actual answer to the question would be Tamora Pierce, who is currently writing books still. but she's not doing it fast enough for my liking. So she's working on a series about one of my favorite characters when he was a kid, and I really want to read more of that. And she's been talking about writing these books since I was in high school, and I'm 26 now.
Oh.
And the first book in this series just came out last year. So I would like more of those faster, please.
Okay, this is kind of on the same subject, but is Stephenie Meyer still writing? Like Twilight Lady?
She released a book a couple years ago that was Twilight,
but
the genders had been swapped.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And then other than that, I think she had The Host and Twilight. So I think that's all she's
The
done
Host.
recently.
I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Because I feel like Twilight was like this weird, crazy thing, and it was such a like quick fad.
Yeah.
And I think it would actually be really funny if she like tried to go back to it now, like 10 years later, and like
a certain author who's bringing everything back to her series quite regularly with new information. Yes.
Somebody who, perhaps one who says that what her young wizards would think about the Israeli-Palestine conflict. That author?
Yes. I'm not going to name any names.
Yeah, not to name names.
Yeah.
But some female British author who writes about young wizards and likes to go online and say ridiculous things about social issues.
Yes.
Okay, what's next? What's our next question?
Our next question is what is one of the favorite books that you have read this year? Because it is now, we're recording this on January 2nd, so 2018 is over. What have you read in 2018 that you really liked?
2018. You said this year, and I was like, I have not finished the book.
I wrote this question 2 days ago.
Okay. All right. I think, I read Great Expectations by Dickens, and that is a really fun, whimsical tale, and I love it. It's so magical, especially if you read it in the voices. Like, oh there, Pip, it's me, Joe Gregory. Like, if you can do the voices as you read it, it's just magical. And then I also read, I read a few. There's a second one I want to talk about, though. Do you remember?
I remember Great Expectations.
Do you remember which book that I wanted to talk about?
I remember Great Expectations, but that's...
well, I don't remember, but, Jane Eyre.
Jane Eyre.
By, Bronte.
One of the Bronte sisters.
Yeah, that book is so good. I read it last year, and, my favorite part of that book, and I can't get over how funny it is, is she's working as a governess for, Rochester, and, he's like a 40-some-year-old man, and then one day he's having a party, and they're like, oh, this fortune teller woman has showed up, and she will only speak to the young women here. And so he gets all these like girls in, and there's one who's like supposed to be engaged to Rochester, and like a couple other ones, and then Jane, and he brings them in one at a time, and he brings in Jane, or she brings in Jane, the fortune teller woman, wink, brings in Jane, is like, oh, do you have a crush on Mr. Rochester? And then Jane's like, Rochester, is that you? And he's like, wink, don't tell anyone. And I'm like, who is this man? And he's like a rich, like, middle-aged man. And he's like, this is how I'll find out if the 19-year-old girl living here has a crush on me. Elaborate costumes and pretending to be a fortune teller.
Nice.
Okay, what's your 2018 pick?
I read 20 books in 2018, and they were all really good. So this was a bit of a challenge for me to narrow it down. But I'm going to go with Entreat Me by Grace Draven.
Ooh.
Draven. I don't know which way it's gone. But anyways, it's a retelling of Beauty and the Beast.
Okay.
It's about a woman named Louvain Duenda. Who
Love it.
It's a very fantasy nickname. Or a name, not a nickname. But she chases her sister, who's running away with a handsome young man. And she follows him to a castle because she doesn't want her sister to ruin her reputation. This is one of those settings. And she meets the lord of the castle, who's named Ballard. And he's been affected by a curse that's kind of made him grotesque and ugly. And there's magic. And he was cursed by his first wife, who like died on her deathbed. And she cursed him and their son. And every month or so, like this curse takes over him. And it's good. It's a really interesting read. Beauty and the Beast is like one of my favorite fairy tales.
Yeah,
so
same.
A retelling is always nice.
All right, I think we have time for one more.
Okay.
Do we have one more question on that?
I have 2 questions, so...
Pick your favorite.
Well, my favorite one is... What's a series or book that you really wanted to like, that you just could not bring yourself to like? Or get into, even. It could be that you...
You answer first, and I'll mull it over a bit.
Mine's actually Game of Thrones.
Oh, okay.
I read the first 3 books. I gave it a good old try, but I just could not get into it past that 3rd book. They're so long, and it's hard to care after a certain point, because you know that your favorite characters are just going to end up dying.
That is exactly how I felt about the show, but I never got into the books because I heard so many people complaining, like, George R. R. Martin isn't finishing the series.
Also, it might never get an ending, which I would also hate a whole lot.
Yes, and that's exactly what it was I kept saying, as soon as he writes that last book, I will read them all.
I also, I prefer to read books that I know are going to have happy endings. That's why I usually fall so much into the romance category, because those are almost always guaranteed to have a happy ending. I read in order to, I guess, escape and feel better about things. And if I read a book, I invest 5 hours into a book, that's just going to crush me at the end. I'm going to consider that a bit of a waste of time.
I love that. I love being devastated by the end of a book.
No.
Okay, well, I can't think of a series, but one classic book that I read that everyone loves, and I was like, can't wait to read this book. Moby Dick.
Really?
I could not get into it. It's so long, and so much of it is just here's what it's like being a whaler. It's just we store this part of the fat in barrels, and then we hang the carcass off. It's it goes into extreme detail of how the practice of whaling works.
Yeah.
And it's at first I was like, oh, this is cool. It's very in depth. But then I was kept kind of waiting for the story to kick back up. And it's the entire middle section of the book. It's I feel 60% of that book is just not story. It's just here's what it's like being a whaler. Or it's here's these little incidental things that happened, but none of them are particularly interesting. And I'm just the actual tale is so good. The beginning when it's Ishmael and Queequeg or whatever the
Queequeg?
What's his name?
Queequeg?
Queequeg.
I only know that because Scully named her dog Queequeg in the X-Files.
Interesting. Yeah, but Ishmael and Queequeg, and they're talking about whaling, and they're in the town, and they meet Ahab, and it's ooh, who's this scary man? The beginning's so good, and then when Ahab first tells the crew about Moby Dick, and is we're hunting the white whale, it's so good, and then it just drops, and it's a slog. It's a battle, forcing your way through that book, and people are oh, it's so fantastic, and I'm yeah. My facial expression does not translate to an audio podcast, but
teeth clenchy. Yes.
My face is scrunched up in a weird way. But yeah, but the ending is fantastic, and the beginning's so good, and I can understand finishing that book and coming off of the high of the ending and just being wow, fantastic book. But I couldn't get over the 60% of just ooh, and here's what we use the whale bones for, and this is how the fins of a humpback whale work, and I'm okay. But yeah, that we are about the mark we wanted to be at for length.
Cool.
Thank you for joining us on this audio podcast.
Yeah.
I don't know why I specified audio.
I think most podcasts are audio.
Yep. Is there anything we should plug, or?
We could plug Twitter.
Okay.
LiteraryAFPod at Twitter.
Yeah.
LiteraryAFPod at gmail.com also.
Yeah, if you want to email us book suggestions or
anything, say hi. Please don't yell at me.
If you want to email about how cool Sheldon is and how you want to see more of Sheldon, just anything like that is really fine. We will accept that. What are you reading now? What's your current
What am I reading right now? Right now, my New Year's resolution is to work through the entirety of the Immortals After Dark series by Cressy Cole. It is 18 books long, with the 19th book coming out this year.
Fantastic.
I finished book 4 yesterday.
Oh, okay.
So I'm getting there.
Nice.
How about you?
I'm currently reading Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes.
Okay,
fancy. It is the funniest book I've ever read, and it is older than Shakespeare.
Oh.
It's it's about a guy who reads so many stories about knights that he develops a particular madness where he thinks he is a knight.
Okay.
And he roams the countryside trying to right wrongs, and he keeps seeing everything as like they would be in a fantasy book.
Okay.
But then they're like, sir, we're just normal mule drivers. And then he's like, oh wait, evil knights. And my favorite part that I've read so far, and it's close to the beginning of the book, but he's looking out and there's these 20, like, I think they're like horse tamers or something.
Mm-hmm.
And then his squire's like, Don Quixote, don't go fight them. There's 20 of them. And he's like, ha, I'm worth 100 of these men. And then Don Quixote proceeds to get beaten relentlessly. And it is just so funny the way it plays out.
That sounds great.
Yeah, it's a tough read because it's old, but it's fantastic.
All right, nice.
Yeah, so thank you for listening.
Thank you.
And I hope you tune in on the next round.
Episode.